Hi, I'm going to talk today about drawing the grids for Hitomezashi patterns. This is a type of sashiko that I just really enjoy doing. I do tend to do it from samplers a lot because I really find it very time consuming to draw the grids, and I get a lot more sewing done if I just buy the sampler. But nevertheless, I do have some linen that I've bought, and I'm going to draw some grids on this, and then I'll show you some Hitomezashi that I've made later. To draw this, as I say, it's on a grid, and so I've bought this cutting mat that is actually marked in centimeters because this comes from Japan and they do mark the stitches in centimeters. The best thing to mark with is a ruler, and I like these really thin metal rulers. It's more accurate than a quilting ruler that's got a much thicker edge. I need a bigger one though because this is not quite big enough for my cutting mat for this project. So I'm actually going to use this very long one, which is a little bit awkward to use. For drawing the lines, in this case, I'm going to use a friction marker. I know these are frowned on in some cases, but I find that the pattern stays on the fabric the easiest. Don't have to worry about it getting rubbed off. This is a almost white fabric, so a coloured one is okay. A lot of it will be covered by the stitching. I personally haven't had a problem with the colour coming back, the lines coming back on these friction pens. But if you have a different experience, I don't want to do it this way, find a marker that you prefer to use, try it out on your fabric and see what you think. So back to the beginning. This is a grid and we're going to mark it in 5mm. I'm going to line my metal ruler up on the actually I'm going to go a little bit further and I'm going to start about there and leave a border. I'm going to start there and just draw a straight line, and you really have to try to be as accurate as possible with this. And again, I'm not going to quite start at the edge. Now this is a green colour, so it's not a real dark colour like a black, but it will be enough that I can see the markings on here. So I've got to find that centre line, line it up, and just again draw down the line. Now I've tried several ways of doing this. You could put your ruler across and dot along. I've tried that. For some reason I don't do very well. It just always seems to I seem to have lines that don't line up at the end. You may be particularly good at drafting or artistic and not have a problem with it, but that way didn't really work for me. Anyway, I would just continue on. I would mark the whole fabric all the way along, and then I would turn it around and mark it in the opposite direction, and I'd just end up with a whole fabric piece that's just squared off, and that would mark my background for where I would draw my pattern. So there's a different problem if you're going to try and do this on dark fabric, and I have some dark fabric here because this kind of a pen, it's really not going to show up for you to mark. So we really need to use a white pen, and there are a few options. There is this kind. Now this is an iron-off pen. This refill is too old to use and it doesn't work anymore. So I will just talk about a little bit about these. I'll show you the red one so that you can see what I mean. This is an iron-off pen. Now the coloured ones of these seem to work fine, a bit like the friction pens. This isn't a friction pen, it's another brand, but a little bit like the friction pens. But with the white, I find that it tends to blot. And also when you start to draw the line, like many white pens, for some reason the white doesn't show up straight away. You just have to wait a few seconds for the line to show. So I do use these sometimes, but they're not really my favourite. The advantage of it is that it does stay on the fabric the whole time you're trying to do the sashiko. You don't have to worry about it wearing off like chalk might. And when you've finished your project, you can just iron it and it's gone. That's the white iron-off pen. Another choice would be this. Now this is a Chaco Ace pen, and this is not iron-off, it's wash out. So that means that at the end of your project, you've got to wash it to get rid of the white lines. So again, the disadvantage vary from pen to pen which one you want to use. One thing you definitely couldn't use for a project like this is like this clover Chaco, which is a chalk, because these grids are quite complex. There's lots of lines, and you wouldn't get very far at all without this rubbing off. And the same with just any chalk marker, really. So again, I'm back to what is usually my favourite marker, which is this ceramic pencil. But even with this, it is eventually going to fade. You're going to have to keep looking and replenishing your lines. So I guess I have to make a choice. Do I want to worry that my lines are going to run off, or wash it at the end? So I think I'm going to wash it at the end. Another way of drawing a pattern onto fabric is to use a grid. This is a plastic or perspex grid, and you would line it up on the fabric where you want it to be placed. And then you do need a marker that's going to show up quite well on this. For this one, I'm just going to use this marker. It is a water-soluble one, but there are no worries about the grid disappearing before the end of you making your pattern. So I think really there are two ways to do this. Either you can just mark in all the holes, and then when you take it off, you'll have just dots all over your fabric. Or you can use the holes at the edge and just mark in those spaces. So you would go all the way along the top, and then all the way along the bottom. And then take your ruler and just carefully line up the dots. And this is where the very thin ruler is better than the thick ruler for drawing these lines. So line them up carefully and just draw your line. And sometimes it does just take a little while for this mark to show up. There we go. And then once you've drawn all your lines in this direction, then you would turn it around, put your grid back on and line it up. And then you could mark it and draw your dots in the other direction. Now on this grid, there are also, there's an inner line of dots that is halfway in between. So if you wanted to make a smaller grid, you could just line that back up just to show you. You could also mark these inner dots. So on some patterns, you may feel like you need these to make your stitch size right. And oh, I didn't quite hit the line there. You really do have to be accurate. I think because I'm talking and drawing at the same time, I'm not being as careful as I should be. So. And this would give you a good size grid. You would do the same the other side, and it would give you a good size grid for marking your stitches. And that's a good stitch length there. So let me put that to one side for a minute. Another way that you could mark a pattern would be by using some paper. So this paper is the same size grid as all the ones that I've been using. And so you would place it on your fabric. And actually, I would probably put a little piece of tape maybe to hold that down, but no, that's probably not going to slip there. And then with your little marker, just go along and mark on the edge of each row. And you could just cut this graph paper down to any size so that you could make the size pattern that you wanted on your fabric. This is some hand-dyed fabric, and I'm just going to show you how I can use a piece of graph paper to draw a grid onto this fabric. So what I've done is I've cut exactly the size that I want the piece to be on the fabric. I'm going to lay it on there. If you feel like it might be in danger of moving around, you can just put a little piece of tape or something to hold it, but I think this should be okay. And all I'm going to do is make a little mark following the lines on the graph paper. Just going to go all the way along there. This is a really quick and easy way to do this. For this one, I'm using a iron off. And again, this graph paper is the 5mm size. And it's just join the dots with the lines of the pen now. Just do it carefully. That's ready for Sashiko. So once you've got all these pattern lines drawn, turn your fabric around and draw it in the other direction. I just do want to point out though that if you use paper, before you start to draw, you really do need to cut it on the line. You can see there's a little bit of an overhang into the next square, and so when you put your pattern on there, you're not just starting at the edge of the paper, because that'll throw your measurements off. So either line it up or just cut that. What I would have done normally if I was doing this is whatever size I wanted, I would have actually cut that exact size out along the cutting lines of the graph paper, so that isn't an issue. These two fabrics already have the markings on them. On this light, it's more a square and a dot pattern, but you can see that you could mark your pattern on there and sew on that quite easily. And I really do like these pre-printed marked fabrics. It just takes away a lot of the effort of drawing. You really need the drawing if you're marking to do sashiko on denim jeans, repairing and things like that. Then you do need to make a small grid and mark it on there. But if you're making a bigger project, having this marked like this is really useful. This is a different one that's pre-marked on the dark fabric. You can decide what pattern you want to do and just sew it onto there. If you want to pre-mark it before you sew, you can decide on your pattern and just use a ceramic pencil or something to mark the pattern on there. And I believe now that you can buy this in yardage with these pre-printed dots on, and they are water soluble, but when it's just dots like this, quite often they don't show at the end anyway. But there is another method of putting a pattern on a fabric, and in that method you don't have to worry so much about the markings. And what you would do with that one is take let me see if I've got a new piece of fabric here. Yeah, I'm not going to mark this, but on your new piece of fabric, you could actually draw the pattern that you want to make on the back. And this is for all forms of sashiko as well. Actually sew it from the back, so that when you turn it over, your pattern is on there. This needs pressing. Your pattern is on there, but there are no markings. You do have to sew it in a different way and be really careful about where you're putting your threads, because you do get in the habit of sewing sashiko where you can see it, and so that might work for you. And I might make another video about trying that at some point, but for now I'm just talking about drawing the patterns on the fabric. So I hope that this has given you a little bit of help with that, and you'll try it out. As I say, it's not something I particularly enjoy doing. Just sometimes it's just necessary. That's just what you have to do. There's something about that's just very soothing about going in and out and doing this stitching like this. There are quite a lot of different patterns that you can do. I just really enjoy doing this. This one not only goes horizontally and vertically, but then it also goes in diagonals as well. And that was really fun to do. These are more time consuming, but they're worth it. You get a lot of pleasure out of doing them. I hope you'll try this out. It's a lot of fun. It's very relaxing. That's the best thing about sashiko. It's just a pleasure. So I hope you've enjoyed this. If you want to see more, check out my other videos, and I'll be doing a lot of other sashiko ideas and things for you to use.